The urn had been empty for 2 days by the time I crossed back into Kentucky, and I still had it belted into the passenger seat like a person. That was the 5th day. I had driven 11 hours from the Outer Banks with the windows cracked and the radio off, because Louise never could stand a quiet car, and I wanted, just once, to be the one who chose the silence. We were married 41 years. 4 years ago, the pancreatic cancer took her in 19 weeks, start to finish, and she made me promise 2 things. Don't let the yard go, and take me to the water on the anniversary. So, I did. 9. Close quote. I did in this, and other year. I stood on a cold beach at sunrise in October and let her go into the surf, and then I got in my truck and drove home to the house we bought in 1989. I want you to understand what that house was, friends, before I tell you what I found in it. It was a brick bungalow on Farrell Street, built in 1926 in a town called Harlow about 40 minutes east of Louisville. When we bought it, the back porch was rotted through, and there was a hornet's nest in the attic the size of a basketball. I spent 31 years working as a building inspector for the county, and I put every one of those years back into that house on nights and weekends. I hung the kitchen cabinets myself. I rewired the whole downstairs. The oak floor in the front room came out of a schoolhouse they tore down in Shelby County, and I sanded it on my hands and knees while Louise held the shop light. I turned onto Farrell Street a little after 4 in the afternoon, and the first thing I noticed was that the maple was wrong. I had planted that maple the spring after Louise's diagnosis, a little 6-foot whip with a stake and a rubber tie. It was bent almost sideways, the stake snapped off at the ground, tire ruts pressed into the grass around it. Somebody had driven across my front yard. The second thing was the truck. A rented box truck, the orange and white kind, parked across the driveway at an angle with the loading ramp down. The ramp was resting on my flower bed. The third thing was my porch swing. It was sitting at the curb, on its side, next to 2 black trash bags, and a rolled-up rug. I had built that swing out of white oak in 1994. Louise picked the color of the cushions. It was sitting out there with the trash like it was nothing, like it was somebody's old junk, and I sat in my truck with my hand still on the key, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then a young man came out my front door carrying my toolbox. His name was Cody Renner, and he had been married to my daughter for 6 years. 35 years old, built like a refrigerator, worked on and off in HVAC. He saw me. He saw my truck sitting right there in the street with the engine running, and he did not stop walking. He carried my toolbox down my own porch steps and set it on the sidewalk and turned around to go back inside. I got out, and my legs were stiff from the drive, and I remember thinking that was strange, that a man's legs could be stiff at a moment like that. Cody, he turned. He had the decency to look somewhere around my collarbone instead of my eyes. Ray, he said, you're back early. I'm back on the day I said I'd be back. What are you doing in my house? You should talk to Rachel. That was when my daughter came out onto the porch. Rachel is 33. She has her mother's chin and her mother's hands, and when she was 9 years old, she broke her wrist falling off the garage roof, and I carried her 6 blocks to the clinic because I didn't trust myself to drive. She came out onto the porch that afternoon in a t-shirt with a box cutter in her hand, and she looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who's brought the wrong package. Dad, she said, we didn't think you'd be here till tonight. Rachel, there's a rented truck in my driveway. I know. I was going to call you. She said it flatly. End quote. No apology in it. Look, it's better if we just do this now. You're going to be upset. Do what now? And my daughter, standing on the porch of the house she grew up in, said, it's not your house anymore, Dad. I laughed. I want to be honest with you, that was my first reaction. I laughed, one short ugly sound, because it was the only thing my body knew how to do. Rachel, I have owned this house since before you were born. It's, check the county records, she said. 4 words. She said them the way you'd tell somebody the store closes at 9. And then she went back inside my house and left the door standing open. I walked up my own porch steps. The boards were the ones I'd replaced in 2011, and I knew every one of them by the sound they made, and they sounded wrong under my feet that day. Everything sounded wrong. The front room had been emptied. My recliner was gone. The bookshelf I built for Louise's paperbacks was gone. It said, in their place were 2 mattresses on the floor and a stack of plastic totes and a big television propped on a milk crate. Somebody's boots were on my schoolhouse oak. and there were black scuff marks tracked across it in a long curve where they dragged something heavy. A woman was sitting in a folding camp chair in the middle of my living room with a cigarette going. Her name was Marlene Renner, Cody's mother, 59 years old, hair dyed the color of a copper penny, and for about 11 years she'd been a property manager for an outfit in Jeffersonville until the state pulled her license. I'd met her 4 times, all of them weddings or funerals. She looked up at me and she didn't stand and she didn't put out the cigarette. "Raymond," she said, "I'm sorry about your wife." She said it like a checkbox. Then she looked back at her phone. I went into my kitchen. There were dishes in the sink that weren't mine and a case of energy drinks on the counter, and somebody had taken the magnets and the photographs off my refrigerator and put them in a grocery sack on the floor. There was a hole in the drywall by the back door about the size of a doorknob, fresh, the paper still hanging. Then I went down the hall to the back bedroom. Friends, I need you to sit with me for a second here. That bedroom was where Louise died. We moved a hospital bed in there in the last 5 weeks because the light was good and she could see the bird feeder. After she passed, I never changed a thing. Her reading glasses stayed on the nightstand. Her quilt, the one her grandmother made out of feed sacks in 1948, stayed folded at the foot of the bed. And on the wall by the window there was a photograph of her from 1981, black and white, sitting on the tailgate of my first truck with her boots crossed at the ankle and her head thrown back, laughing at something I said and never wrote down. That photograph hung in that spot for 36 years. The bed was gone, the nightstand was gone, her glasses, gone, her quilt, gone. There was a dresser in there that wasn't mine and a duffel bag on the floor and an ashtray on the windowsill. And on the wall, where the photograph had been, there was a rectangle of paint about 2 shades darker than the rest, and 1 nail. I put my hand flat on that wall. I don't know how long I stood there. When you get to be my age, you learn a few things about grief. And one of them is that it does not care whether you have time for it. It comes when it comes, and it takes what it takes. I stood in that room with my hand on the wall, and I felt something in my chest go very cold and very quiet. Then I did the first smart thing I did that whole day. I took out my phone and I photographed everything. The empty nail, the scuff marks on the oak, the hole in the drywall, the cigarette burn I found on the windowsill. I went outside and photographed the license plate on the rental truck, and the contract number taped inside the passenger window, and the ruts across my yard, and my porch swing lying at the curb. 31 years of writing violation reports for the county will do that to a man. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Then I called 911. I want to say that plainly, because I know what some of you are thinking right now. I know exactly what you'd have done, and I did it. I stood in my own driveway at 4:52 in the afternoon, and I called the police on my daughter. 2 officers came out in about 12 minutes. A younger one named Pike, and an older one named Danvers with gray in his mustache. I told them the whole thing in about 90 seconds. I've been gone 5 days. I own this house. Pike, and Pike. There are 6 people in it who do not have my permission to be there, and they have thrown my wife's belongings out on the curb. Officer Danvers listened. He was decent about it. He asked me for my ID, and I gave him my license with that address on it, an address I've had for 36 years. He asked if I had documentation of ownership, and I said yes, in the safe in my closet if it's still there. Then he asked me to hold on, and he went back to the cruiser, and he sat there with a tablet for what felt like a very long time. When he came back, his face had changed. "Mr. Whitlock," he said, "I've got the property record up for 1412 Farrell Street. There's a deed recorded on this property at the county clerk's office on the 7th of this month." "The 7th, I said. "I left town on the 6th. "Yes, sir. It's a quitclaim deed. It transfers the property from Raymond E. Whitlock to Rachel Whitlock Renner." He turned the tablet around so I could see it. "Sir, is that your signature?" And there it was, my name, in handwriting that looked like mine the way a man, in a photograph, looks like a man. The R2 round, the tail on the K going the wrong direction. Notarized, stamped, recorded, indexed, filed, public, real. "That is not my signature," I said. "I believe you," Danvers said, and I could tell that he did. "But sir, I can't put anybody out of this house today. And on paper, right now, the recorded owner of this property is inside that house telling me she lives here. That makes this a civil matter. You're going to need an attorney and you're going to need to go to court. They're in my house. Intim, the Bastra Comet, I understand. My wife died in that back bedroom, and her things are in the trash at the end of my driveway. He looked at the curb. He looked at me. He was quiet for a second and then he said, Mr. Whitlock, if I could remove them, I would. If somebody kicks in your door tonight, you call us and we will come. But I can't undo a deed on the side of the road. Nobody can but a judge. I want to stop here for a minute, because this is the part I did not understand until it happened to me, and if you take one thing from what I'm telling you, let it be this. In this country, a piece of paper filed at the courthouse carries a presumption. It is presumed to be true until somebody proves it is not, and the burden falls on the man saying it's a lie. Every state runs a little different, and I've had folks tell me it works another way where they live. But here's the part that's the same everywhere. The law about who lives in a house is slow. The law about who signs a document is not. That difference is the only reason I got my home back, and I didn't know it yet, standing in my driveway that evening watching a police car pull away. They let me get my safe out of the closet. Cody stood in the hall and watched me do it like a bouncer. My deed was still in there, and the mortgage payoff letter from 2016, and 31 years of tax receipts, and Louise's rings. I put the safe in my truck and I sat down on the tailgate because I did not have anywhere to go. And that is when a man said my name behind me. Mr. Whitlock? I turned around. He was standing at the end of my driveway in a windbreaker with a lanyard around his neck, holding a folder, maybe 50, heavyset, calm, the face of a man who has knocked on a lot of doors. He said his name was Curtis Hobbs, and he was an investigator with the county clerk's office. He said, Sir, I've been trying to reach you for 4 days. I need you to look at something. He opened the folder and he held up the deed. I had already seen it on a police tablet. That was different. Holding it in my hands was different. There was my name at the top. The basic. There was the legal description of my property, the lot and block numbers I'd read 1,000 times at work. There was that forged signature. And clipped behind it, on letterhead from a clinic I had never heard of, was a one-page letter stating that Raymond E. Whitlock, age 67, had been evaluated and found to be in the early stages of dementia and was no longer competent to manage his financial affairs. There was a power of attorney behind that, naming Marlene Renner as my attorney in fact. My legs went out from under me. I'm not saying that for effect. I have never fainted in my life, not when I fell off scaffolding in 1997, not at the hospital when they told us 19 weeks. But I went down onto the concrete of my own driveway with that folder in my hands, and Curtis Hobbs caught me under the arm and eased me the rest of the way down, and he sat there on the ground next to me while I made a sound I have never made before or since. They didn't just want my house, friends. They took my wife's picture off the wall, and then they told the county I had lost my mind. Hobbs got me a bottle of water out of his car. When I could talk again, he explained why he was there. 3 weeks earlier, a mobile notary named Teresa Salas had filed a report that her seal and journal were stolen out of her vehicle outside a grocery store in Jeffersontown. When a stamp gets reported stolen, the clerk's office flags anything that comes through with it. My deed came through with it. They had already been looking at it for a week and a half. They just couldn't find me because I was standing on a beach in North Carolina with a coffee can of ashes. Mr. Whitlock, he said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Do you know who did this? And I sat on my driveway and looked at my house with the lights on inside it. My daughter's in there, I said. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, that's the worst answer you could have given me. I got a motel room out on the highway that night. And $49, a bed that smelled like carpet cleaner, and I lay on top of the covers with my boots on and looked up my own address on my phone. The county puts it all online now. Anybody can see it. I looked at the deed. I looked at the date, stamp, 7th of October, 9:41 in the morning. I had pulled out of my driveway on the 6th at 7 a.m. They had waited less than 27 hours. Then I scrolled down and I saw one more thing, and I sat straight up in that bed. There was a lien application pending. A home equity line of credit, $140,000, filed with a bank called Falls Regional, signed by Marlene Renner as attorney in fact for Raymond E. Whitlock. I did not sleep, not 1 minute. The next morning I sat in the office of an attorney named Gail Frazier, who does real estate work out of a converted house on 3rd Street and who Curtis Hobbs told me was the meanest person in that county when it came to property. She was in her 50s, half glasses, and she read the whole folder without saying a word. Then she took off her glasses and set them down. "Mr. Whitlock, I'm going to give you the good news and the bad news, and you're not going to like the order. Go ahead." "None thing. The bad news is that I can file to have that deed set aside and I can file an ejectment action to remove them, and both of those are going to take months. Could be 6. Could be a year if they fight it and drag it out, and people like this always fight it. Meanwhile, they're in your house. They're going to burn it down or sell it. They can't sell it now, the flag's on it. Which brings me to the second bad thing. The most it, and excel and..." She leaned forward. "I know what you've been thinking about all night. Don't do it. I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You've been lying awake thinking about the shut-off valve and the breaker panel. Cut the power, cut the water, change the locks, put a padlock on the meter, park a truck across the drive, play a radio at 3 in the morning. I did not answer her, because she was right down to the radio. "Mr. Whitlock, listen to me. In this state, that's called self-help eviction, and it is against the law. Next, you do one of those things and you hand them everything. Right now, you are the victim of a felony. The minute you shut that water off, you're a defendant, they're the sympathetic party, and some judge is looking at a 67-year-old man who cut the water off on a household with a 7-year-old child in it. Do not touch that house. Don't go on the property. Don't yell at them. Don't post about it. Nothing. Then what do I do, ma'am? Sit in a motel?" And Gail Frazier said the thing that changed everything. 1. You stop trying to win a property dispute, she said. A property dispute is slow and it's civil and it's their word against yours. You go get a crime instead. A crime is fast. And a crime has handcuffs on the end of it, and Mr. Whitlock, from where I'm sitting, somebody in that house has already committed about 4 of them and doesn't know we know. That afternoon, the 3 of us sat down at her conference table. Gail, me, and Curtis Hobbs. Here is what we had. We had a stolen notary seal, reported 3 weeks before my deed was filed. We had a forged signature. We had a physician's letter on letterhead from a clinic that, when Hobbs called the state board, turned out to have closed in 2019 and whose named doctor had retired to Arizona and had never heard of me. And we had a pending loan application for $140,000 against my house. Here's what we didn't have. Proof of who did it. A signature forgery is a hard thing to pin on a person. Marlene's name was on the power of attorney, but she could say she was handed it, that she believed it, that she was only helping her daughter-in-law's poor, confused father. Rachel's name was on the deed as the person receiving the house, but a person can receive a gift they didn't know was fake. Every one of them had a story ready. Then Hobbs said, "The loan closes Thursday." We all sat there. "They have to appear in person," he said. "Falls Regional requires the attorney, in fact, to sign in branch. She has to sit down at a desk in front of a bank employee with a camera on the wall, and she has to say out loud that Raymond Whitlock is unable to be there and that she has the authority to sign for him." Gail Frazier smiled for the first time since I met her. "Then let her," she said. "I didn't sleep that night either, and it wasn't grief this time. It was something with an edge on it. The grief this, and Wednesday I did 2 things. First, I went to see my neighbor Bernadette Kowalczyk, who is 78 and lives directly across Farrell Street and has watched that block like a hawk since the Nixon administration. Bernie put her hand over her mouth when I told her, and then she got mad in a way that I found I badly needed somebody to be. "Raymond," she said, "there was a girl in a little white car on the 7th. Sat right there for an hour. And that renter woman came out and took your mail out of your box. And I saw her do it twice. And I thought, well, they must be minding the house for him. Bernie," I said, "does that doorbell of yours record?" She had 11 days of it. Her camera looked straight across at my front walk. On the morning of October 7th, at 9:04 a.m., it caught Marlene Renner walking down my front steps with a manila envelope. At 9:53, it caught her coming back without it. On the 9th, it caught her opening my mailbox and taking everything out of it, and then doing it again on the 11th and the 12th. Taking mail out of a box that isn't yours is a federal offense, friends. I did not know that. Curtis Hobbs did. The second thing I did was go get Louise's things out of the trash. I know Gail told me to stay off the property. The curb is not the property. I drove down there at 11 o'clock at night and I went through 2 black garbage bags on the side of the road in the dark with a flashlight in my teeth, and I found her reading glasses with one lens cracked, and I found her grandmother's quilt with a boot print on it, and I put them in my truck. I did not find the photograph. I looked in every bag twice. Thursday came. The Falls Regional Branch on Delaney Road has a manager named Alvin Teague, a small, careful man who had been briefed the day before by Hobbs and by an investigator from the State Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit, and who was, I could tell, absolutely terrified. The closing was set for 2 o'clock. I was in Mr. Teague's office in the back with the door shut, sitting in a chair I had been told not to get out of, watching a monitor that showed the 4 desks on the floor. At 1:52 they came in. Marlene Renner had done her hair. She was wearing a blazer. She had a leather folder under her arm, and Cody came in behind her in a clean shirt, and behind him, in the doorway, my daughter, holding the hand of my granddaughter Nora, who is 7 years old and who was wearing the sparkly headband I bought her at the state fair. I want to be honest with you about what happened in me when I saw that little girl walk into that bank. I nearly stood up. I nearly walked out there and blew the whole thing apart, because whatever was about to happen was going to happen in front of her. Mr. Teague put his hand on the back of my chair. He didn't say anything. He just left his hand there. They sat down at the desk of a loan officer named Denise Frank, and I sat in a windowless office 9 feet away and watched my family on a screen for 22 minutes. That was the longest 22 minutes of my life, and I have sat in an oncologist's waiting room. I couldn't hear it live. I heard it afterward, and then again in a deposition, and then again at trial, and I could recite it to you today word for word. The loan officer asked whether the property owner would be joining them, and Marlene Renner, in a soft, sad, patient voice, said, "No, honey, he's not well enough to be here. He gets confused in the afternoons especially. I handle everything for him now." The loan officer asked if the family had considered whether Mr. Whitlock might be able to sign for himself on a good day, and Marlene said, "Bless his heart, he can barely tell you what month it is. He signed the house over to Rachel back in the spring while he still could. It's what he wanted. We're just trying to get the roof done before winter." She said it, pa, in a bank, on camera, with a microphone on the desk that she had signed a disclosure about and never read. Then she picked up the pen. "It's sin." 2 detectives and a state investigator came through the front doors of that branch at 2:19 in the afternoon. I heard Marlene's voice go up through the wall before I saw anything on the monitor. She stood up so fast the chair went over. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she was the attorney in fact and she had documentation. She said, "And this is the part I'll never forget," she said. "His own daughter is sitting right here. Ask her, ask her." And Rachel didn't say anything. They arrested Marlene Renner in the lobby. They arrested Cody in the parking lot 10 minutes later when he tried to get in the truck. Rachel, they did not arrest that day. A woman detective walked her and Nora into a side room and sat with them, and I stood behind a door and listened to my granddaughter ask her mother why the man was holding Grandpa Cody's arms like that. Then the detective opened the office door and said, "Mr. Whitlock, she's asking for you. I want to tell you I went in there. I didn't, not that day. I could not make my legs carry me into that room, and I have thought about that a great deal since. They cleared my house that evening, because the deed was now evidence in an open felony investigation and the occupants had been arrested in the act of using it. The whole thing turned over in about 4 hours. A judge signed an emergency order. 2 cruisers and a deputy sheriff stood in my front yard while Cody's brother Dustin, and Dustin's girlfriend, and Marlene's boyfriend, Wade, carried plastic totes out of my house and put them in that rented truck. Dustin cussed at me from the driveway. Wade wouldn't look at anybody. It took them 2 hours and 10 minutes to leave a house it had taken them 5 days to take. When the last taillights went off the end of Farrell Street, Bernie Kowalczyk came across the road in her housecoat and hugged me on my own front walk, and then she went home, because she knew. I went inside. The house was destroyed, not ruined, but hurt. Burns on the windowsill, a hole in the drywall, my oak floor scarred in a long curve, cigarette smell in the curtains Louise sewed. I walked through every room with the lights on, Then I went out to the detached garage, my shop, where I keep my tools and my table saw and 40 years of coffee cans full of hardware. They had used it for storage. There were boxes stacked to the ceiling on my workbench, and on the concrete floor, face down, half under a shelf, with a boot print on the back of it and the glass cracked corner to corner, was the photograph of my wife on the tailgate of my first truck in 1981. I sat down on an overturned bucket in that garage and held it in both hands for a long time. That was the night I found the other thing. It was in a cardboard box on my workbench with a stack of Marlene's papers in it, the kind of box people forget when they leave in a hurry. Bank statements, a folder of printouts, and a spiral notebook with a Dollar General price sticker on the front. Inside that notebook was a to-do list in a woman's handwriting. It had dates. It started in July. It's It's 3 months before I ever booked that trip. It said things like get seal and Teresa's car Thursday grocery. It said Ray out of town, confirm dates. It said clinic letterhead, Cody. It said file the 7th, HELOC the 21st, list in the spring, and underneath that, in the same hand, sell by June should clear 190. They were never going to live in my house, friends. The mattresses on the floor, the folding chair, the truck, the 6 of them sleeping in my rooms, none of that was people who needed a place to stay. That was occupancy. They needed a body in the house, so the deed would look normal to anybody who drove by. They were going to strip my equity out with the loan, sit on it through the winter, and sell my home in the spring, and I was supposed to be somewhere by then, in some room somewhere, being handled. And on the last page of that notebook, at the bottom of a list of names and phone numbers, was a line in different handwriting. My daughter's handwriting. I have 30 years of her school papers in a footlocker upstairs. I know it like I know my own. It said, Dad's tax bill comes to the house, get the mail every day. Marlene Renner went to trial in March. She did not take a plea, because people like that believe right up to the end that they can talk their way through a wall. The jury had the bank recording, the notary's stolen seal report, my neighbor's doorbell video, the fake clinic letter, the notebook, and a handwriting examiner from Lexington who spent 40 minutes explaining to 12 people why the R in that signature was not my R. It took them under 3 hours. She got 7 years on the forgery and fraud counts, with the elder exploitation enhancement, and she is serving it now. Cody took a plea in January, 2 years, and restitution. Dustin got a misdemeanor for the stolen mail and a year of probation. Wade left the county, and nobody has heard from him, which is fine with me. Teresa Salas, the notary, testified. She had lost a year of business over that stolen stamp, and she cried on the stand, and afterward in the hallway she apologized to me, which I did not accept, because she had nothing to apologize for, and I told her so. The deed was voided in open court in December. The judge read it out and struck it and ordered the clerk to record the correction, and Curtis Hobbs walked me down the hall to the county clerk's office and stood there, while a clerk named Wanda put a stamp on it, and Hobbs said, "Congratulations, Mr. Whitlock, you own your house." My daughter was charged too. She was offered a diversion because she had no record, and because a prosecutor looked at a 7-year-old girl and made a decision I have made my peace with. 5 years of supervised probation, restitution, 120 hours, and a felony that comes off her record if she doesn't put a foot wrong. She sat at that table and she pled to it. She looked over at me once. In April, she came to the house. I hadn't seen her since the bank. She stood on my porch with Nora holding her hand, and I looked at her through the storm door for a good 10 seconds before I opened it. "Dad," she said, "I know you don't want me here." "That's true." He said it was going to be temporary. Marlene said we'd sign it back. She was crying. I didn't know about the doctor letter. I swear to God I didn't know about that until the detective showed me. "You knew enough to take my mail every day, Rachel." Haas? She didn't have anything to say to that. "I want to tell you what I did next, and then I'll be about done." I did not let her in. I told her that what she took from me was not a house. Anybody can take a house. And I told her I had watched her sit at a bank desk while a woman told a stranger I couldn't tell what month it was, and that she'd had 1 second to say a true thing out loud and she chose not to, and that she was going to live with that whether I forgave her or not. Then I said, "Nora comes on Saturdays." She looked up. "And that's not for you," I said. "And That's for her. I'm 67, and that little girl is going to get a grandfather, and I am not going to let what you did cost her one more thing. I handed her a business card. That's a family attorney. You and I will put it in writing so nobody has to trust anybody. Saturdays, 10 to 4. You'll drop her off and you won't come in. She took the card. She put her hand on my screen door and I stepped back from it, and after a minute she went down the steps. Nora comes on Saturdays. We've built 2 birdhouses and a stool. She's learning to run the sander. The floor guy came in May and pulled the scars out of that schoolhouse oak. I patched the drywall and painted the back bedroom myself, a color Louise picked out in 2003 called morning wheat. I put in new locks, a camera at the front and the back, and a fireproof box that is bolted through the floor joists, and I put an alert on my property record at the county clerk's office, which is free, which takes 4 minutes, and which I would ask every single one of you watching to go do tomorrow morning. If anybody files a single piece of paper against my house for the rest of my life, my phone rings. I didn't know that existed. Now I do, and now you do. I found the porch swing at a scrapyard in Shelbyville. Chains were gone and one arm was split, but it was white oak and it was mine, and I brought it home in the bed of my truck and I spent a weekend on it. And on a Saturday in June, I stood on a chair in the back bedroom with my granddaughter holding the level, and I hung my wife's photograph back on that one nail, in that faded rectangle on the wall, in a new frame with new glass. Nora asked me who the pretty lady on the truck was. I told her that was her great-grandmother, and that she was laughing at a joke I made in 1981, and that I have never once been able to remember what the joke was. Here's what I know now, friends, and then I'll let you go. I spent 31 years inspecting other people's houses. I could tell you if a joist was undersized from across a room. And I never once thought to look at the one piece of paper that says a house is yours because I assumed that a thing that true couldn't be stolen with a stamp and a photocopier. It can. It happens to somebody in this country every single day, and it happens most to people my age, and it very often happens from the inside, from the people who have your spare key and know when you're driving to the coast. So check your record, put the alert on it. Keep your deed where a person can't get at it. And when somebody tells you a lie about who you are, don't argue with them about the house. Go find the paper they signed. I lost my daughter in October and I got my home back in December, and I would be lying to you if I said that was an even trade. It isn't. There's a hole in me that no judge signed an order about. But I sat out on that swing last night with a cup of coffee, in the dark, listening to the crickets in the yard where my maple is standing back up straight now with a new stake on it, and it was quiet. And it was mine.